welcome. Be sure to like and subscribe for more scary stories, or I will come for you. I'd like to thank Aaron Scrimshaw and Dino6 for joining the Curator's Disciples. Your viewership is very much appreciated. A big shout out to my main man, Grim Reaper. He's back in the chat. He's quietly been working on creating a Curator tattoo that he will be inking on himself in the back end of this year. An absolute legend. I'm very humbled you chose my motif as your point of inspiration. If anyone would like early access to my latest stories and an ad-free listening experience, consider becoming one of the Curator's Disciples. The link is in the description below. Finally, a reminder that all of my stories are available on my podcast. The Curator Dark Web Horror Anthology is now on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Without further ado, today's story, The Mount Maker by the Curator. I don't really know why I'm even writing this down. It's not like it's going to change anything now. And honestly, putting it into words just makes it feel more real. But if I keep it in my head any longer, I think I'm going to lose my mind. The truth is, I can't stop seeing it. The faces, that unnatural stillness, the way the eyes seemed like they could blink any second, even though I know for a fact they never will again. So, yeah, I guess I'll start at the beginning. My name's Daniel. I'm 23. I've been into taxidermy for most of my life, though I never thought of it as something dark or creepy. For me, it was always about preservation. I've never been the hunting type. I don't have it in me to kill an animal, but I've always had this fascination with the way a moment in life can be captured and kept forever. When I was around 14, my grandpa used to take me into his shed. He'd been a hunter back in his day, the kind of guy who knew the forest better than his own living room. The shed always smelled faintly of wood shavings, leather, and the sharp tang from the tanning chemicals he used. I remember sitting on a little stool while he worked, watching him pull a deer hide over a form, his hands moving slow and careful like a surgeon. The walls were lined with mounts, not just deer heads. He had foxes, pheasants, ducks, each one frozen mid-glance, mid-turn, like they'd been plucked from time. When I was a kid, I thought they were magical, like they were still watching us. Grandpa told me that's what made good taxidermy. You didn't just stuff an animal, you gave it its dignity back. By the time I was old enough to work, I'd saved up for my own tools. At first, it was just little things: glass eyes, scalpel blades, sewing needles. I started small, working on songbirds that had hit windows, the occasional squirrel I found on the road before it got too damaged. Roadkill's not glamorous, but for me, it was like giving them a second chance to be seen. Over time, I got better. I learned to split tiny eyelids without tearing them, to wire delicate necks so they sat naturally, to mix the perfect tint for a lifelike nose pad on a fox. Most people never notice details like that, but in the taxidermy world, it's the little things that separate art from garbage. There's this whole network of people online who trade tips, critique each other's work, and sell materials. It's a niche community. Small. If you're not already into it, you'd never stumble across it by accident. I've made friends on those forums over the years. Folks from all over the world who share the same weird little obsession. A month ago, I was scrolling through one of those forums late at night. It was just the usual stuff. Posts about tanning methods, debates over the best eye brands, people showing off mounts they'd done for clients. Then I saw a thread with the title, Private marketplace. Hard to find materials. That caught my attention right away. Hard to find usually means things you can't just buy at a craft store. Exotic bird skins, ethically sourced big cat claws, rare horns. The post was short. Just a sentence and a link. No explanation. I hesitated before clicking. The link didn't look shady exactly, but it also didn't look like something public. Curiosity got the better of me though, so I opened it in a separate browser. The site that came up was bare bones. Black background. Minimal menu. No flashy banners or ads. It looked old school, like something built in the early 2000s and never updated. I scrolled through the categories. The first few were normal enough. Antlers, skulls, full mounts, skeleton articulation. Then I got to the last category, specialty trophy mounts. I almost scrolled past it, but the thumbnail had stopped me cold. It was a head, human, mounted on a dark wooden plaque like a deer. At first, I actually laughed because it seemed so absurd. I figured it was some hyper-realistic sculpture or prop. People make silicone busts, so lifelike they can fool you from a few feet away. I clicked. The page loaded into a grid of thumbnails, each one a different head. Men, women, young, old, different ethnicities. All mounted, all staring out from the photo with this horrible stillness. I leaned closer to the screen, trying to spot the imperfections that would give away that they were fake. But the more I looked, the more my stomach turned. The eyes. They weren't glass. They were wet, glossy. You could see the tiny red veins in the whites. The skin didn't have that plastic sheen silicone gets. It had pores, faint freckles, little blemishes. Even the hair looked natural, with that unevenness real hairlines have. I clicked on one at random. The description made my mouth go dry. Skin tone preservation, 98% retention rate after 24 months. Ocular gloss finish, natural wet effect maintained indefinitely. Authentic hairline integrity, no synthetic grafting required. No mention of replica, no cast from life, no artistic reproduction. Another listing had a note. Client requested preserved smile maintained during final sealing. The photo showed a woman with her lips slightly parted, teeth showing in a way that looked wrong. The gums were pale, almost gray. Her eyes seemed frozen mid-expression, like whatever she'd been feeling in her last moments had been trapped there forever. I remember sitting back from my desk, just staring at the wall for a minute. My chest felt tight. I told myself it was performance art, that it had to be. People fake horrible things online all the time for shock value. I closed the tab, but that night I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time I blinked, I saw those eyes. So the next day, I went back. When I went back the next day, I told myself it was just to prove to myself it wasn't real. That's the only reason. At least, that's what I kept repeating in my head while I typed the URL. The homepage looked the same, but now there was a little banner at the top. Demonstration, members only, 8 p.m. GMT. Underneath was a single image, not a face. Just a close-up of gloved hands holding some kind of curved blade, the metal catching the light. The caption read, "Technique Showcase, Facial Preservation Methods." I felt this weird mix of dread and curiosity. I told myself there was no way it would be what it sounded like. Probably just some workshop video using a mannequin head. But a part of me already knew it wasn't going to be that. I clicked the Request Access button. It asked for a username, a password, and a payment in cryptocurrency. I almost bailed right there. It felt like crossing a line. But then I thought, if it is real, this is proof. I could record it, show someone. I guess I convinced myself it would be doing the right thing. So I paid. At 8 p.m. exactly, the stream went live. The screen faded from black to a fixed camera shot of a room that looked like a cross between a medical lab and a workshop. The walls were a dull gray. No windows. Everything in there was clean, too clean, with this sterile shine like it had been scrubbed down with bleach. I could see shelves in the background lined with jars, rolls of white cloth, and what looked like bottles of preserving chemicals. Front and center was a long metal workbench, stainless steel. On it was a man, alive. His wrists and ankles were strapped down with thick leather restraints, and there was a wide strip of tape across his mouth. His eyes kept darting around, landing on the camera for just a second before flicking away like he couldn't bear to look right at it. A figure stepped into frame. They were wearing a dark green apron, a black mask that covered everything except their eyes, and heavy rubber gloves. They didn't look at the camera, just at the man on the table. Their movements were calm, precise, like they'd done this 100 times. When they spoke, their voice was muffled slightly by the mask, but perfectly clear. "Tonight," they said, "we'll be discussing cranial preservation techniques, specifically how to maintain structural integrity during live extraction. Trauma to the facial area must be avoided at all costs." My stomach flipped. I felt my mouth go dry. They weren't joking. The masked figure opened a drawer in the bench and pulled out a small metal tool, something between a scalpel and a hook. They held it up to the camera, turning it so the light glinted off the edge. "This is a periorbital separator," they said casually. "It allows us to free the ocular tissue without damaging surrounding musculature." They set it down on a tray with other instruments. Scalpels, long, thin forceps, a needle with clear tubing attached to a pump. The man on the table thrashed weakly. His muffled voice was a mix of sobs and muffled pleading. The masked person didn't even look at his face. They were studying his neck, running a gloved finger along the skin as if mapping something in their head. What happened next didn't feel real. They started with an injection, a long needle pushed into the side of the man's neck. He jerked, tried to scream through the tape, his eyes wide. The masked person explained, in that same calm, instructive tone, that the injection would slow the heart rate without compromising blood supply to the head. They didn't rush. Every step was explained, like a cooking tutorial. They made 2 small incisions low on the man's torso, sliding the tubing inside. I watched, horrified, as dark blood began to flow through it into a container beneath the table. The man's body twitched with every slow pump. "Gradual exsanguination," the masked person said, "prevents discoloration in the facial tissues." My vision went spotty. I had to remind myself to breathe. This wasn't makeup. It wasn't fake blood. The smell even seemed to seep through the screen, or maybe that was just my brain filling in the blanks. The man's breathing grew shallow, but the masked figure wasn't done. They moved to the head now, running their fingers over the cheeks, tilting the chin, studying the bone structure like an artist deciding how to mount a sculpture. Then came the worst part. They made a small incision behind the ear, just deep enough to slide that curved blade in. I could see the skin lift slightly as they worked it around, unseen inside, separating something. The masked person explained how this hidden entry would allow the head to be removed without visible damage to the front of the face. The man's eyes were wet with tears, darting in random directions, his chest barely moving. Once complete, the masked person said, we replace the ocular fluid with a clear resin, locking the gaze in place indefinitely. They reached for a syringe filled with something thick and glossy. I couldn't watch. I shut the laptop. And still, even in the darkness of my room, I could see those eyes. I didn't sleep. Not a second. The second I closed my eyes, my brain would drag me right back to that table. That cold stainless steel surface, the masked figure's steady hands, the way the blood moved through the tubing like something mechanical was sucking the life out of him. I couldn't shake it. Not just the images, but the sounds. That low, wet pulling noise from the pump. The muted scraping of a blade against bone. The way the victim's breath stuttered like he was trying to breathe and beg at the same time. By the time the first thin line of daylight slid through my blinds, I felt hollow. My limbs were heavy, my stomach was knotted tight, and there was this cold buzzing in my chest like I'd had too much caffeine but without any of the energy. I told myself I had to do something. If I waited even a day, that man could be gone, and it would be on me. I shoved on yesterday's jeans from the floor, grabbed the hoodie hanging on the back of my chair, and jammed my feet into the first pair of shoes I saw. I didn't even bother with socks. My car keys were already on my desk, right next to my laptop, and for a second I actually thought about going back to the site first, grabbing screenshots or something. But the thought of seeing that room again made my stomach roll, so I just left. The morning air was cold, damp. I barely felt it. I just drove. The police station in town is a squat brick building with a row of narrow windows along the front and a big glass door that squeals when you push it open. I pulled into the first empty space I saw and sat there for a second, gripping the wheel, trying to work out how I was even going to start explaining this without sounding like a lunatic. When I went inside, the smell hit me first. Coffee and disinfectant. The same mix you get in small medical clinics. The front desk was behind a waist-high counter with a scuffed plastic divider on top. A uniformed woman was sitting there, maybe mid-30s, with her hair pulled into a tight ponytail. She was going through a stack of forms, tapping them into neat piles. When she looked up and saw me, her eyes flicked over me quickly. My unshaven face, the dark circles under my eyes, the way I kept shifting my weight like I couldn't stand still. I could tell right away she thought I was either hungover, strung out, or about to waste her time. "Morning," she said. Her voice was clipped, professional. "Can I help you with something?" I stepped up to the counter, resting my hands on it because they were trembling and I didn't want her to notice. I saw something online last night. A video. A live stream. I think it was real. I think it was. I swallowed hard. A murder. Her pen froze over the form she'd been writing on. She looked at me more carefully now, like she was trying to decide if I was serious or not. "All right, take a breath and start from the beginning. What exactly did you see?" I told her, not in one rush, but in fragments. I described the room, the table, the straps. I told her about the masked person, the calm way they spoke, how they explained every step like they were teaching a class. I told her about the victim's eyes, the way they stayed alive the whole time, and how the person talked about preserving the head. I didn't give her every gory detail. I was scared it would make me sound insane, but I gave her enough that my voice was shaking by the end of it. She didn't interrupt except to jot notes. Her expression didn't change much either, though I thought I caught a flicker of unease when I mentioned the blood pump. "Do you have a recording of this?" she asked after a moment. I shook my head. "No, I couldn't. I wasn't thinking about recording it. But the site's still up. I know exactly where. She held up a hand. Don't say the site name out loud if you think it's hosting illegal material. Just write it down here. She slid a form toward me with a pen. My handwriting looked like a drunk person's, jerky, uneven, but I managed to scrawl the URL. She glanced at it, then back at me. And you said you paid to watch this? Yes, but only because I wanted proof. I thought I could take it to someone. I understand, she said, though her tone was neutral. Not warm, not judgmental exactly, but there was a distance there. You know most of these things turn out to be fake, right? She went on, tapping the pen against the paper. There's a whole market for staged material like this. It's not unusual for people to hire actors, special effects artists, that kind of thing. I shook my head. No, it wasn't staged. I've seen fake stuff. This wasn't like that. You didn't see the way his eyes. I stopped because my voice had gone too loud, echoing in the quiet room. She gave me a small, placating nod. All right. They'll review it and see if there's anything actionable. She paused. But you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that it's just a hoax. Don't get yourself too wound up over it. That last line felt like a slap. I had just poured out the most disturbing thing I'd ever seen in my life, and she was telling me not to get wound up. I forced a nod and stepped back from the counter. My legs felt heavy, like I was walking through sand, but I made it out into the daylight. The sun was too bright. Everything felt too normal. I drove home on autopilot, barely aware of the streets. When I got back, I shut my blinds, sat on the edge of my bed, and stared at my phone. Part of me kept hoping it would ring, that the police would call to say they'd tracked the place down, that the guy was alive. But it never rang. I sat there for what felt like hours, my legs half asleep under the desk, my hands still resting lightly on the trackpad, fingers twitching from the ghost memory of scrolling. The images kept replaying in my head without my consent. Every blink was a flicker of that head, the sheen of the skin, the strange glassy calm in the eyes, the way the creator's hands moved like a craftsman proud of his work. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even lie down. I just moved between the chair and the couch, switching lights on and off like I was trying to find a version of the room that didn't feel so alien. My phone buzzed twice, messages from friends I didn't open. I couldn't handle their normality. By the time the sky started to pale through the blinds, I had convinced myself I'd hallucinated at least some of it. It was easier to believe my brain had exaggerated the details than to accept they had been real. But the browser history was still there when I checked. The bookmarks folder I'd made in a haze of adrenaline still contained the link. For the next 3 days, I tried to live like nothing had changed. I went to work. I answered emails. I made coffee. But in every quiet moment, I found myself thinking about him, the mount maker. That was what the chat had called him anyway. I kept wondering what kind of person could do that without hesitation and what the rest of his life must look like. Did he go grocery shopping? Did he have a neighbor who waved to him over the fence? On the 4th night, I broke. I told myself I was only going back to the site to confirm it was still there. Just a quick check, then close the tab forever. But the marketplace loaded like it had been waiting for me, its dark backdrop and muted text strangely comforting in their familiarity. The next stream announcement was pinned right at the top. Same time slot, same private access instructions. There was even a short preview clip, blurred in all the right places, just enough to suggest more than it showed. My stomach turned, but my mouse hovered over it anyway. I didn't click that night. I wish I could say it was willpower. But the truth is, I was too tired to follow through. Still, I slept worse than ever, knowing it was coming, knowing that when it did, I'd probably be there again, watching. Over the following week, I started noticing details in my daily life that reminded me of the workshop in the stream. A coworker's polished wooden desk made me think of the mounting plaques. The pale mannequin heads in a department store window made my throat tighten. Even the smell of fresh varnish at a hardware store sent me back to that screen, to the way the mount maker had leaned in to apply the finishing touches. By the time the night of the next stream arrived, it didn't feel like a choice anymore. It felt like inevitability. The night of the second live stream came faster than I was ready for. I told myself over and over that I wouldn't watch it, that I couldn't watch it. But the pull was relentless, like some dark force dragging me back to that nightmare. It was a mixture of dread, sick curiosity, and this desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, the whole thing was some elaborate hoax that would finally fall apart. When I logged into the site again, the homepage had changed. The cold black background was still there, but now dominating the screen was a huge countdown timer. Big white numbers ticking down the seconds, each moment hammering into my brain like a ticking bomb. Beneath it was a preview image, grainy but unmistakable. Her face. The officer. The same woman who had taken my statement at the police station just days before. Her face was pale and gaunt, framed by the glossy black mask pulled down to her neck. Her eyes were wide open, frozen, unblinking, staring straight at me. She was strapped to a metal table, wrists and ankles bound tightly with thick leather restraints. A wide strip of duct tape covered her mouth, smeared in places with dark red stains that looked alarmingly like dried blood. I felt like I was suffocating. My hands shook uncontrollably, and the phone nearly slipped from my grip. The cold light from the screen seared against my skin, but I couldn't look away. My entire body was locked in place, trapped between horror and disbelief. I wanted to turn it off, to close the tab, to shut my laptop, to bury my head under a pillow and block out the world. But I was frozen. The countdown hit 0, and the live stream began. The same sterile workshop flickered into view. Gray walls, the single, harsh, overhead light humming softly. The metal workbench gleamed under the light, cold and uninviting. The masked figure appeared again, calm and methodical, slipping into frame like a ghost. The voice came through, clipped and mechanical, like a teacher reciting a lesson. "No trauma," the voice said, smooth and chilling. "We preserve the face first. Expression is everything." I watched her eyes, darting wildly beneath the tape, searching for a way out that didn't exist. Her shallow breaths barely moved her chest, each one a struggle. The masked person pulled on a fresh pair of thick black gloves, fingers stretching them over one by one, deliberately slow. Then, with clinical precision, they picked up a scalpel. Every movement was agonizingly slow, each cut measured and deliberate, as if the person was caressing her face rather than slicing through flesh. The voice continued, explaining the procedure in grisly detail, how to separate the skin from the muscles beneath without disturbing the natural expression. I couldn't tear my eyes away as the masked figure made a shallow incision along the edge of the cheekbone. Then another, near the temple, gently lifting the skin like peeling back thin parchment. Underneath, the muscle fibers twitched faintly, damp and glistening with blood. Dark rivulets oozed from the cuts, pooling on the metal beneath. The officer's eyes never closed. They remained fixed, wide and terrified, as if she could see everything, including me. The masked figure worked with tools I didn't recognize, tiny clamps and hooks that held the skin back to reveal the underlying tissue. The voice described how preserving the minutiae of muscle tension would keep the final mount's expression hauntingly lifelike. Then came the syringe, filled with a thick, clear liquid that gleamed like glass in the overhead light. "This locks the gaze," the voice said, "so the mount keeps its soul." The masked figure injected the resin carefully into the officer's eyeballs, the liquid slowly replacing the natural fluids. I could almost hear the faint plopping sound as the substance filled the sockets, fixing the eyes open forever. Then, with the same syringe, they coated the lips, sealing them in a silent, permanent scream. By the end, her face was flawless, eerily perfect, but frozen in a moment of pure terror. I sat back from the screen, choking on my own breath. The room felt suffocating, the air thick with a scent I couldn't place, cold metal and something sweetly sickening, like decaying flowers. And then it hit me. They weren't just making trophies. They were watching me. I realized, with a sick twist of dread, that by simply visiting the site, I'd put a target on my back. They knew who I was. I packed a bag that night. Cash, passport, the essentials I could grab in minutes. I booked the earliest flight out of the country without caring where it went. At the airport, every shadow seemed to shift. Every glance burned like a warning. I was sure they were already there, waiting. As the boarding call echoed through the terminal, a cold certainty settled in my bones. Running might not save me. The mount maker had my name, my face, and soon I would be the next trophy. This is the Curator. I hope you've enjoyed today's scary story. Until next time.